Hello, welcome everyone to another episode of the Definitely Talking podcast. I'm Shanna Groves, also known as Lip Reading Mom. Today, to welcome our very special guest, Rachel Barber. Let me tell you about Rachel. So, Rachel is with a company called Living for Moments. She is based out of the UK. Her work emphasizes helping organizations and individuals communicate more effectively and access opportunities to meet their needs and aspirations. And this business has actually been shaped by her professional background across a wide range of sectors, including her lived experience with disability, which we'll talk about more in our interview. She also talks about overcoming barriers that can appear in employment and services, often unintentionally. In 2025, Rachel became a certified lip reading teacher in London. And for individuals, she does provide support in lip reading and hearing management. She also helps people communicate with more confidence in everyday life. And I'm very happy to welcome you today, Rachel.
So thank you very much, Shana, for inviting me. And that's a very nice summary of what I offer. And I look forward to exploring a bit more what you're to
Thank
cover
you.
today.
Thank you. Well, first question, Rachel, that's always at the top of my podcast interviews is how can you relate to being deaf or hard of hearing? How do you self-identify? And can you tell me more about your history and your experience?
Okay. So I've always identified myself as deaf because I've been severely deaf since infancy. And for me, saying deaf means that people know up front like, what my needs are more clearly, but also it potentially reduces misunderstanding. If I ignore someone, then I just say deaf. It's clear on the tin, basically. And I also identify as deaf because over the years, I've actually become profoundly deaf. So really, I do need to be able to see people's faces, and I need to make sure that people are aware of my needs. So that's the main reason why I identified deaf. My journey as a severely deaf child has obviously huge challenges in terms of acquiring spoken language, and that that has in itself another story. But I think people underestimate how hard it is to acquire spoken language. So I've become more aware over the last decade or so about the importance of other languages, such as sign language, to be more inclusive of people who may not be able to acquire spoken language so easily. Because spoken language is not for everyone. I have got spoken language, but I think people should be offered both personally so that people can choose which is right for them. And they can complement each other and they can be useful to be able to use different communication styles in different settings because lip reading and hearing is really tiring. So having that break with the visual language would be quite nice, but but I haven't got that luxury because I never learned it to a proficient level. I am learning, but it is much harder learning it as an adult. So I would really encourage children to learn both if they have severe to profound hearing loss in particular.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for giving that very thorough synopsis in like 5 minutes or less about your experience. And, we have a lot of people that have come on the Definitely Talking podcast that identify as hard of hearing. So it's really great to have someone who can identify as being deaf medically, but also has an appreciation for deaf culture and all of the different ways that we can communicate, such
Yeah.
as with spoken language or with manual communication with sign language. And I'm curious, Rachel, if in your work, do you primarily work with people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or do you work with a wide variety of people? You can tell me more about your work that you do.
So in my business, I work with a variety of people, really. So businesses, they won't necessarily be deaf themselves, individuals deaf in the organisation, but I do work with quite a lot of deaf and hard of hearing individuals, particularly those who are learning how to lip read and to communicate in different settings. Because hearing loss, there are so many different challenges, and having grown up with it here in life, I've acquired a lot of useful techniques over the years and technology, and knowledge of technology, of the different technology that's growing with us. And keeping up to date is really, really hard. So I try to bridge that gap for people who have acquired hearing loss later in life to have the most up-to-date information in terms of techniques and technology that will help them in different settings. So obviously with those people, I'm working directly with deaf and hard of hearing. And I really do stress that I don't make a distinction with how deaf you are, because I think the impact is the key thing here. However much hearing loss you have, it can have a huge impact on people's lives. So even someone with mild hearing loss is really struggling with conversation. That is a really big impact. So we really mustn't do that scoring of, oh, I'm deafer than you. I never do that. I really work with you, the individual, to make sure that they feel included and that they're able to participate in society as fully as they can with the hearing they have. So that's my aim when I'm working with individuals.
Yes, I think that that is very refreshing to know that these labels that we use to self-identify or the community that we belong to due to our level of hearing loss, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I agree with you why we limit ourselves on some of these labels. I don't know about you, Rachel, but I find that if I tell people that I'm hard of hearing, they just speak louder. And if I tell
Yeah,
people I'm deaf, then they're more likely to ask me, how can I accommodate you? Or they freeze and don't say anything. I've had people start writing to me, or
yeah.
people start signing to me and I'm not fluent. How do you handle situations to where you need to advocate for your own communication needs, such as in a place of employment or in a medical office? Those are some big ones. I think that people are very impacted when they cannot hear. How do you advocate for yourself in these settings?
So I'm really clear at the beginning when I'm able to lip read really well, but I do use assistive technology when appropriate. So for new faces, it's much harder to lip read. And also in a stressful situation, you're not going to be able to lip read as well. So for example, in a doctor's scenario, you might not be getting information that is really comfortable. So you actually want to make sure you get the facts right. So I often ask permission to use transcribing technology that I use on my phone, and in that, I pretty much all the professionals I've met have said, yeah, you can use the transcribing. And this is not just for myself, but when I'm taking my children when they were younger to hospital appointments, etc., I would always say, could I just use this as a backup? It also means that if I miss read something on the face for a minute, then I can quickly look down on the transcript and I will say, oh, sorry, I misunderstood that, and then just move on. But it gives me reassurance and confidence that I'm equipped to deal with that appointment. So yes, most people are fairly good, but you're right. I mean, people can react very, very differently. I've experienced a lot of negative assumptions about my abilities. I've also experienced people assuming that I sign because I'm profoundly deaf now, and when I was severely deaf, they also assumed it sometimes. So, those assumptions, we need to really be careful about assumptions. We need to ask rather than assume. So, setting up an interpreter is a waste of resources for somebody who really needs it. I
Yes.
don't, it's not of any value to me. So, so it's not. If the thought was nice, it was kind of you, but you didn't do your homework. You need to make sure that you ask and listen to people. So,
Right, right. We almost need to educate others on what medically deaf means and what culturally deaf means, because
yes.
they can be a wide expanse of identities in that each of those too.
Yeah.
I'm curious, have you ever, I probably already know the answer to this question, but have you ever encountered discrimination because of your deafness, and how did you handle that encounter?
Discrimination is something it's very I'm afraid. So the biggest challenge I have is the ability that in challenging and believing that I can do what I offer. So I offer training, and people say, "Well, how can you train when you can't hear fully?" And my response is actually I have much better active listening skills than many hearing people because I don't just lip read. I look at the body language. I take time to really make sure that I understood what you're saying. And I'm a very, very good facilitator in conversations in training. So if somebody comes up with a question and there's a bit of a disagreement, I'm really good at sort of mediating and making sure that we get hear both sides really well, and actually we learn from each other in that way. So I was saying we have better, more enhanced skills by having understanding and awareness of our own limitations and other people's limitations too. So I think it's a strength really to so yes, I usually counter discrimination tackle really provide evidence and say no, I actually can't more than capable. I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't feel I was capable. So just recognize most people, you need to realize that most people know what their strengths are. So work with those strengths.
I don't know about you, Rachel, but I think because we both are deaf and we use spoken language to communicate, that we encounter some different assumptions about that. Not just do you sign, but oh, you speak so clearly. I had no idea. I have heard that so many times.
It
And
is so
do
fascinating.
you have to educate on the fly when people make these comments that probably in normal everyday conversation they would never do that because it's not polite?
Yeah, it's really reflecting the assumptions that people make that you won't be able to speak. And for many people, they've acquired hearing loss later in life, so their speech shouldn't be affected anyway. And for people like myself, that we made a huge effort from early on with this resources, and I was very privileged to have the sort of upbringing where I was brought up in a very what I call what one of my teachers called an oral family, where they made a real conscious effort to make sure that I could hear and see them, and that sentence structure was short enough for me to acquire language in a way that is a bit more what's it, more prescribed than I suppose from hearing children just pick up noise around them and pick up language, whereas for me it was a bit more of an effort to teach it. So it was very visually, it was also a lot more visual clues than what was being said. So it's a bit more conscious learning of a language if you follow me there. Uh,
Sure.
yeah.
You are the founder and CEO of the company Living for Moments. How can we find out more information about the work that you do?
Okay, so the first point of call would be the website itself. So if you put "Living for Moments" in, you'll find what I do. So I have really three strands in this company. One is about helping individuals and families communicate effectively. So learning to lip read and how to communicate because communication is two ways. So if you have a husband or spouse who doesn't communicate to you effectively, you're constantly not going to understand each other. So it takes two to dance, and it's the same with communication. So I support individuals on communication. So that's one strand of my work, which I really enjoy that because it's so empowering when you see people's lives being changed and being so from reducing isolation and helping people to stay in employment and building relationships up again after frustration or not being able to communicate to each other. So those are the sort of outcomes that I see, which I really enjoy. The second strand of my work is supporting businesses to be inclusive of anyone, and so it's disabled people and a wide range of other people who may be excluded for different reasons. And that's because I know what it's like to be excluded. And it's something I'm really passionate about, and I have also been much more observant in organisations of how people become excluded. So I've noticed a lot of barriers that other people haven't I haven't seen. And so I help organisations to identify those barriers and to remove those barriers, to widen recruitment, but also to retain valuable and skilled employees, which who they may potentially lose if they don't remove those barriers and are not supportive enough. So that's the second strand of my work. I also support care and health and social care professionals on understanding and different conditions from, for example, dementia, and how to apply the law. And this is something I'm also really very, very interested in and knowledgeable about, because I worked in care for a number of years, and I was a care home manager in 3 different homes. And I became aware that the way I work is quite different to other people. So I mentioned earlier about the active listening skills. A lot of care home managers are very focused on the paperwork, which is, I don't deny is really important, but what's often missing is the active listening. So I got to know every single resident, family members, all the staff, what they liked, what they disliked, what their interests were. So I was able to create a very different environment. And that links to my next point, which is in terms of how I support care professionals, is how to become less risk averse. Because culturally and society, we do not allow risks enough. As soon as you're disabled or as soon as you're old, people say, oh, you can't do that because it's too risky. People make assumptions. So a classic one for me was, oh, you can't go cycling because you're deaf. And the same thing happens in care settings. A lot of people's lives are very limited by the assumptions that we make, and so you can't possibly do that because it's too dangerous. When actually we're adults, we should be treated as adults, and we should be provided the same choice as anybody else. And then there are laws that actually, if you know it, if you know how to understand it and how to apply it, can empower people to make those choices. So one of the laws I teach and include in my training is the Mental Capacity Act, which is a very, very powerful, and the Human Rights Care Act together with risk assessment. So, for example, in the care homes I supported, I would listen to what residents wanted, and if I felt, oh, this was really, really good, they were, or even if I didn't think it was really good, I would make sure I do my research, look at what the risks were, look at what the benefits were, look and see how we can make it happen, and then include everybody. I don't do it myself because then we share the risks, to make sure everybody's informed on what needs to happen. So my favourite story, by a long way, is how I went about enabling table tennis to be played in care homes. So I had a lovely CQC inspector said, "Oh wow, this is amazing! How did you do it?" And I went through through the process. I shared. So this happened when some women who came and talked to me and said, "Oh, I really miss playing tennis." And I said, "Oh, what do you miss about playing tennis?" And they said about camaraderie, they missed the competitiveness, they missed the physical activity, they missed the laughter that they had. And then one of the women in the group said, "Oh, I played table tennis until recently. That'd be lovely to have if we could do that." And I thought, "Oh, this is a lovely idea." And I said, "Leave it with me. I'll go away." And so I went away and I identified so many positives from this suggestion. And said, okay, these are the benefits. It improves eye-to-ball coordination, it improves balance, it slows cognitive decline, it gives people purpose, it's a community feel, all sorts of benefits, and there are many more benefits. And when I looked at the risk, potential high risk of fall, potentially injuries, and those are sort of risks that you sort of think, how do you mitigate the risk? Making sure that they were hydrated, making sure that they were wearing appropriate footwear, making sure that people didn't play too long, because some of them had been sedentary for so long, I didn't want somebody to have a heart attack on them, so I had to build it up gradually. But those are the sort of things. And then I shared this plan with all the staff, with all the residents, and and also the family, to make sure that everybody was on board with this. And they overwhelmingly, people said yes. And even those who didn't want it, that's fine. They could watch and enjoy watching the people play. So it
Yes.
was a wonderful atmosphere from this table tennis. And that's why Living for Moments was founded, because I wanted to enable other care home managers to feel equipped and to be able to respond positively, to say, yes, let's explore this, let's try this, rather than saying, no, it's too risky, which is quite a common reaction of care home managers because they're really frightened of all the things that could go wrong. And they have a duty of care. So it is getting that balance is very, very tricky. And I want to help people to feel more confident and and how to do the risk assessment and how to
Absolutely.
empower people to do things that they want to do. Because if you stop people making choices, you're creating an environment where people are just existing, they're not living. That's why I do this work, because I just want people to be able to live his life as fully as possible.
I
And this is
love
not just
that.
about,
I love that quote. You said we want to encourage people to live, not just exist. And that actually leads to our last question because I'm going to ask you a question. I call it a big three question, number three. And it's usually a question that you answer in a series of three, whether it be three items, three people, three things, three skills, whatever. And the number three comes from behind me, the photos that those of you watching on video, there are three little kids, and those are my three children who are all now grown, but they were cute and adorable in those photos. So, number three. Okay. So, if you, Rachel, were doing a podcast, who are three individuals, living or not, that you would wish to interview and why?
okay, so Evelyn Glennie would be one. She is a deaf percussionist and she's an amazing musician. But she has had opened up to me what that hearing is much more complex than just hearing with your ears. It's also hearing it involves feel, and she is a real example of that. She has shown how to feel music through the floor, through your fingers. So I would love to learn more about that. And she is living, and she's still very much a very successful musician. So that would be one I would choose. I would also choose Helen Keller because I think she was a pioneer in what she did. She was deaf and blind, and she did so many positive things, including setting up education for deaf children. She did so many interesting things in her life, and she was a brilliant speaker and writer. So I'm sure she would be a very interesting person to talk to. And also, I'd be interested to interview Beethoven because I know he was a very famous composer, but I know also that towards the end of his life, he was actually quite deaf, and yet he was able to compose music in a way that people are really like, wow, this is really emotional music. And I think this links back to my first guess in terms of how you feel music. And I think we would find more about the feeling of music as well as hearing music if you interviewed him.
Yes,
So
it's a tactile experience, music. You feel the vibration. There's emotions involved in that. And I do find it quite refreshing that two out of three of your individuals are musicians or were musicians or composers, but in the music field. And I received cochlear implant last year, but before that, I was quite deaf and could not hear a lot of notes on a piano. But it had been my bucket list item to learn to play piano ever since I was a child. And so when I received the cochlear implant and as part of my auditory therapy, I purchased a keyboard and I'm teaching myself how to play sheet music, different genres of music. And so I think about these inspirations of people who are finding ways to enjoy the things they want to while they're deaf or hard of hearing, whether it be using technology or tactile means or, using some type of a music meter to be able to watch visually if I'm in tune or not. But well, Rachel, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to meet with me, and our interview has, been very enlightening for me. Thank you for taking the time.
No pleasure. And thank you very much for inviting me. Have a lovely
Yes.
weekend.
And to our audience listening or watching, thank you for being part of this episode. We will see you next time on the Definitely Talking podcast. Until then, take care.